We have next Dr. Letchmi Ponnusamy. She'll be giving us a speech on Singapore's evolving approach to gifted education. Dr. Letchmi is a senior lecturer specializing in gifted education and in inclusive teaching practices. Her research focuses on effective pedagogy for diverse learners and has investigated instructional differentiation strategies for challenges faced by teachers in mixed ability classrooms in schools. And this would be very interesting to hear more about, since we've seen the Australian case where they had some segregated gifted schools only. She is the co-editor of the Curriculum for High Ability Learners and is the associate editor of the Pedagogy's Journal. She has also authored chapters and articles on curriculum innovation, concept-based curriculum, and differentiation. We are very proud and honored to have Dr. Letchmi with us today. Please welcome.
First of all, I'd like to thank the organizing committee, chairman, all the related people we met yesterday. You've done a wonderful job of putting together the support for the Asia Pacific Conference. I'm a bit jet lagged, so apologize for this. Okay, so I know I've got a very tight time frame. So Farhana, I know you're supposed to time me, right? So I'll set my own timer so that I don't overrun. Yeah, there goes. So I came to this presentation because I think the call was to find out more about what happens in Singapore. So although I do work with differentiated instruction, the presentation today will veer towards what happens in Singapore. But if you want to know more about differentiation, just come over and talk, and done some work on that. So let me get on to explaining why I called it Evolving Approaches to Gifted Education. Singapore's approach to gifted education has been active since 1984. We kind of, I think you know a little bit about Singapore. It's not a new country. A lot of people in Asia have heard about, how we our approach to education. We don't have any natural resources at all. So Singapore's leaders and the people have always focused on education as an important gateway to develop our economy, right? And so it has always been at the forefront to focus on education, right? So in 1984, the Ministry of Education decided that we needed to support children who were exceptionally intellectually able. Academic classroom ability was very visible with certain groups of learners. So what they decided to do was to develop the intellectual gifts and to kind of create a very tight program. And I say tight in many ways. I'll explain how that comes about. We came up with what we call a centralized model of gifted education. And what that means, and I'll just share this with you, is I call this a traditional approach because it has changed. In fact, it just changed last year. So we've had about 30 years, 1984, lost track how long that's, about 50 years of gifted education in Singapore. And we recently decided to change it slightly. So please walk with me for a little bit. I'll just explain to you how this has changed. And then we talk a little bit about what that means and why it came about. So talk about those two things. Firstly, we've always had a two-stage assessment process. What happens is nationally, the Singapore schools are given students in school, all Ministry of Education schools are tested, given we call it off-stage testing, 2 years above their current level testing in schools, after which they go for another selection test. So there are two-stage assessments that have happened, and we start that as a very young age in primary 3. That's about, we're looking at 8-9-year-old children. What happens after that is they select the top 1% of the cohort. So that's about 500 to 800 students in each year. What happens is these students are then taken out of their existing primary schools and then go into 9 specialized primary schools, and they are given a very enriched curriculum, both in terms of depth and breadth. And one of the things that we've been doing for the last 50 years, we've been training teachers to support this group, right? So we're looking at only 1% of the overall population, and they've had dedicated teachers who would give them in-class instructional programs, but we also have specialized programs for all the children. So for primary school, for example, they have this thing called the creative writing program. All the kids I call them kids, but all the children in the gifted program will have an individualized research study program that they will do. So each student will decide on a program area of research that they want to do, and they will carry out research over about six months of the year. So these are specialized programs for the primary learners. We also have specialized math and science training programs. We call it the E2K program. Some of you may have heard about this. And these are run depending on the school. Some schools run it as part of the school curriculum. Some schools run it outside of the school curriculum. But this has been the traditional approach for primary education, supporting gifted learners in schools. What has happened is that because Singapore's education system is so important, there has been a lot of questions about whether we can expand access to these gifted learners. And so as of last year, the government has changed our approach to selection and provisioning of gifted resources to these groups of learners. So why? Okay, basically, and I've just laid down 5 reasons why, or what challenges there were to this gifted program. Firstly, it was very limited in terms of the offering. 1% of the population is very small. If you go by some of the models in the US, you can go up to 20% of the population. So that's a very small group of people. We are not hitting everybody. We need support. The second reason is that we seem to have only one entry point, which is after primary 3, the kids go into specialized schools. So any kid who is slower, and we know about diversity of gifted learners, some of them start very early, but some of them have a delayed start. So if you have a student who discovers that, or we discover that the child is extremely talented within maybe science or math, we can't put them back into the program. So that's one problem with the structure that we've had in the past 50 years. The other reason is that we tend to focus more on intellectual abilities. And in fact, when I mentioned that we have a 2-step process, we measure English language ability, math testing. These are the 2 areas we select. What happens is that students are then have to be extremely good in both these areas. So if you have a kid who is very good in language but not good in science, that child may not qualify for the top 1%. So you have a group of students who are extremely good in 2 areas, but what about the kids who are good in math or good in English but not in both? So that was the challenge that we realized. In fact, it's not that we were not aware of it, but we were trying to support people within the resources that we had. The fourth problem was that a lot of the gifted ed programming in school was very tied to the school curriculum. So what happens is that teachers, because we want to train them for end-of-year exams, we tend to modify the curriculum based on what we taught in school. So if a child, for example, in Singapore wants to learn about dinosaurs, right? And I'm a science teacher by training. I used to teach science in a secondary school. And the child's ability to learn about dinosaurs within the school curriculum is very limited. Because the teachers would say, I'm not testing dinosaurs in the university or secondary curriculum, so I'm not going to focus on that. So tendency is people tend to be very focused on that final exam. That's the problem, which we feel will tend to kind of make kids very disassociated. Just now we mentioned, we heard that students can actually become very distracted when things are not suited to what they are interested in. So if I have a kid who has interest in dinosaurs sitting in my science class, that kid is not going to be interested. right? So that's what happens. And finally, only 9 schools offer it. If you have a parent who lives, Singapore is a very small country, but despite that, parents who live in maybe the western end of Singapore may not want to let their kids travel to a school, maybe that is maybe 50 minutes away by bus. So when they're very young, you don't want them to travel very far. So a lot of parents say, when you give them the opportunity, they'll say, no, I don't want to take the gifted program. So these are real challenges. So since we had these challenges, the Ministry of Education decided to modify the program, and this is what it will look like. And I'll just talk about this. And this is our minister introducing the program last year in 2024. We have a National Day rally where the Prime Minister gives a speech about changes in policy directions that the nation would take. And one of the things they did was they would go up now, new direction, is 10% of the school population will be identified. So the gifted program is now going to be expanded as of this year. So our primary 1 cohort, starting this year, will actually, as they go older, they will become, we will select a much broader group of kids. Now, how they select them will also change, because in the past we had central identification. Ministry would identify 1%. But what will happen in 2025, this year's cohort, is that they will now allow schools to do the selection. So schools will do 2 layers of selection. One is they will get inputs from ministry, and the schools can then identify which of these kids in the school, so they can come up with maybe 20% of the school's population, and the ministry will provide that list to schools, and the teachers and the school's principals or the gifted ed coordinators in the school will then decide, of that group, what do I observe in the classroom? So it goes back to this idea of Renzulli's model of gifted education, which is you have high, above average learners who have a very deep interest in something, but who may not be committed. So if teachers feel that a child is not ready to be given the opportunity to learn, and that's where the teacher's input is very important. Because if you select a kid, and the kid is able to learn, but doesn't have the motivation to learn, then you are actually going to waste your resources in a sense. So what will happen then is the schools can then decide which of the groups, if you give a broad group, which of these groups can we support them with? So this is the change that they're going to do. The next thing they're going to do is they're going to offer this in all schools rather than the 9 schools. So that's something that it's going to break away the challenges parents had with letting the kid leave the school and go somewhere else. And the students will also be given, and the interesting thing about it is because it is going to be happening at each school, the identification process is no longer tied to 1 year. So teachers and schools have the opportunity to identify students at all points from the primary 3 age onwards. So there's not just one layer of testing. It is actually going to allow teachers and schools to decide who needs the program, who can be supported. So you can actually have people coming into the program, and if the student and the teacher feel that it's too much for me, I want to step out for a while, I can step out for a while. So this allows the differentiation in terms of the support that you give the learners. And you don't have to stamp the kid and say, this kid is gifted, I'm going to give him whatever whether he's ready for it or not, I'm just going to give him whatever he needs. That's going to be something, again, like I said, we want to make sure we give the support to kids when they are ready for it, because commitment is an important part of the learning process. So that's the one big change that's going to happen. And when I share this with you, I must say that there are a lot of things that are still being decided by the ministry, right? So one of the things we know is that there will be a broader group, and this comes out of the report, the speech that I just shared with you earlier. But there will be other things that will happen, exciting things that will happen. If you have a kid who is in the school, but who is very interested in dinosaurs, so go back to the example. The other thing that the ministry is interested in doing, remember the 9 schools? They're going to let the 9 schools have their own enrichment centers. So what will happen is after school, if a kid wants to learn about dinosaurs, and if there's sufficient kids in the schools, we all know there are some things that kids always like. Dinosaurs, Harry Potter, a lot of interesting ideas. They like AI. So what happens is schools can then decide to have centers of enrichment that goes beyond the classroom. So these will happen, and they will be supervised at the 9 centers. So the 9 centers have their teachers who have been trained. They are they're experts. They've been teaching it for the last 50 years. They will then support these specialized enrichment centers. So we're trying to provide the support both within the classroom and outside the classroom. This is the change that they're hoping will be given to them. Now, having said that, because there's a change, there's always going to be challenges, right? So I just want to pick up on a few challenges that's going to happen. The first one is we used to have this program only in 9 schools. We're going to have to open it up to all schools. So immediately, the first thing you'll think about will be funding. Okay, what else? Funding. Training. Who? Basically, the teachers, because we've all heard that there's a general, lack of desire, right, to support gifted learners. People must know who the gifted learners are, right? So and generally, people have this sense in Singapore, especially that whenever I train teachers, I do train groups of teachers who are interested to know about giftedness, but when I ask them, do you have a gifted kid in your class? They will always say no. They are in the gifted education program. All the children who are gifted, according to the people who come into my programs, they say the kids who are gifted are all in the gifted program right now. Nobody has been left out. So there's a lot of, there's a sense that they've been taken care of. And I don't have to do this bit of work. It's not my job. So that has got to be the first level of training. We've got to change people's conception of who's the high ability learner, who's a gifted learner, right? And we actually have these 2 terms that have been operating in Singapore, gifted and high ability. Now, we also have to talk about what those 2 things mean now. So all these are important parts of the training that we got to talk about in our, next few years as we push forward. The other issue is that I think Jay mentioned is different schools in Australia offer gifted programs in different ways. So how do you monitor the program? How do you make sure that all the schools are giving the best that they can for the gifted learners? Because, some schools are probably going to be having a group of people who can, put things together, and money, resources is a very important part. Some schools are better resourced than others. So that is going to be one issue that we have. And the third thing is, one of the problems about putting high ability learners, this comes from the research that I do with differentiation. If you put a high ability learner in a mixed ability context, there's a tendency for teachers to say, this is very complex to do. I shall just work on the weakest learners and I'll support them. If you have 24 hours in a day to support 40 kids, I say 24 hours because teachers are always thinking about their students. I do that, right? So when you do that, what happens is that you say, I'm not going to bother about the kid who's HAL or the gifted learner because he can take care of himself. See, a misconception. So therefore, you tend to support the weakest learners. We said that just now. There's a tendency to support the weaker learner because I think it's just the human psyche. If a person is weak, we support them. If a person is good, we just leave them be. It's a very common human psyche. Nothing wrong with that, but then the strongest learners get left out. So that's the challenge that I have noticed. I've done research across many primary schools in Singapore, and we realize this is the general mentality. So we need to change that. And finally, we also have some parental expectations about high abilities. The question that was asked of Tip just now, we know her as Tip. She said, what about parents, right? How do you change parents' mindsets about gifted learners? Because even in the last 50 years, the Ministry of Education has had constant interaction with parents. They've had this. But now you're opening it up to a much larger group. So who will do that coordination and the talking to the parents? How would you justify the identification process to all these parents who are going to be knocking your door and says, why is my kid not part of the program? Right? And why is it that my child has to go after school, and then another parent comes around and says, I want to put my kid on that program. All this has to be coordinated and supported. And we need to manage parents' expectations about what high ability means in a gifted learner. Because people will say, just like teachers who think that high ability learners can take care of themselves, there are a lot of parents who believe that my kid is high ability, he can take care of himself, or there are some parents who say, no, you have to give my kid, all the support that they need. So you have multiple demands on the teacher's time. So there is that challenge that we will have to talk about. So as I said, I'm not here to tell you how perfect Singapore's education system is. We've done quite good things with our system, but we are forever trying to change the way we think about how to support the learners in the classroom. Right? And I think, this is just my possible way out, but we don't have to talk about that because I think this is just my ideas about, how we can support that. I think this is the last slide. I'll just stop there and I'll ask you all to, ask any questions you have about what I've just shared with the Gifted program. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.